Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a comprehensive look at a stack of sources that address one of the most critical and, frankly, enduring topics in global security.
We're talking about the uncompromising nature of modern terrorism.
Exactly. And, crucially, the specialized, highly effective alliances that have formed to combat it.
And the materials we have here they're challenging. They really are. They refuse to use euphemisms, which forces us to confront the threat in, I'd say, two major dimensions.
Okay, so what's the first one?
First, we get a very stark ideological diagnosis of the enemy. The sources frame this current wave of terrorism as an expansionist, almost pioneering force.
A pioneering force. We'll definitely need to unpack that. And the second dimension.
The second part moves into an in-depth operational analysis of a specific and highly effective strategic partnership.
The one between India and Israel.
That's the one. And it's a partnership that views this threat purely as an existential, intelligence-led war, completely divorced from political negotiation or any attempts at placation.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really distill the core, uncompromising argument that's embedded in these documents. We want to understand why conventional deterrence, the rules that govern the Cold War and state-on-state conflict.
Why it just completely collapsed.
Yes, why it collapses when faced with this particular ideological enemy. And then how two democracies, united by decades of shared acute vulnerability, have managed to develop an actual actionable blueprint.
A blueprint for proactive, technology-driven, and truly relentless counterterrorism.
So get ready for some deeply challenging perspectives and, I think, a surprising degree of clarity on what the actual stakes are in this long war.
I think you're right. The sources really compel us to move beyond conventional military thinking. We have to grapple with what happens when an enemy explicitly rejects the survival metric.
Rejects the idea of just surviving.
Right, and defines victory on an entirely different plane of reality. You have to understand, this is not about fighting for territory in the traditional sense. It's about fighting for universal dominance.
And that kind of threat requires a response built on something different.
It requires a response built on shared urgency and, maybe most importantly, deep operational trust.
Okay, so let's start with that core argument. It begins with a really fundamental redefinition. The initial source, which is titled "The Terrorist as Pioneer," immediately shifts how we're meant to perceive the modern terrorist.
He does.
We're asked to move them away from the image of, say, a simple criminal or a disorganized insurgent and elevate them to what the source actually calls a pioneer. That word is so specific.
It is, and this pioneer analogy is strategically, I think it's the most important concept in the entire document. It's not just a clever turn of phrase, it completely defines the threat model.
So what does it mean in this context? A pioneer of what?
The terrorist views himself, according to this source, as the spiritual equivalent of the Silicon Valley entrepreneur.
Wow, okay. That is a provocative comparison.
He's meant to be. This is someone operating not just in the present conflict, but they believe they're building an inevitable future.
An inevitable future.
Which is the universalization of Islam. They believe they are introducing a concept, which is universal jurisdiction under Islamic law, that will eventually and inevitably replace the current flawed system of nation-states.
The comparison to an entrepreneur is fascinating. It implies
yes,
innovation, right? Scalability, a refusal to accept the status quo.
Exactly. If they see themselves as pioneers, they're focused on expansion and establishing a completely new global order, not just gaining political concessions or a piece of territory here or there.
So this is what makes containment impossible from their perspective.
It makes containment functionally impossible, yes. And it renders temporary coexistence completely irrelevant. The source really emphasizes that for this doctrine to be satisfied, Islam cannot remain one religion among many, peacefully coexisting within sovereign borders.
It has to be the system.
It views itself as the final universal truth destined to cover the entire globe. Therefore, the Darul Islam, which is the realm of submission, must keep expanding, relentlessly and continuously, until the Dar al-Harb, the realm of war, which is basically everything outside of the realm of submission, is entirely eliminated.
So we're dealing with a fundamentally expansionist, uncompromising doctrine. It sees any permanent non-Muslim polity, whether that's Israel, India, or its secular state in Europe, as a kind of historical anomaly.
An anomaly that must eventually be corrected.
And often through force.
Often through force. And the sources are very insistent on this point. This isn't some modern perversion. They frame it as a deep continuity with classical doctrine.
Okay, that's a crucial point. So this isn't a new idea. It's presented as drawing from a very old one.
That's the historical context that the source argues cannot be overlooked. It presents this modern mission as a direct continuation of classical Islamic doctrine, specifically regarding jihad as offensive warfare.
And his purpose was?
Its purpose was the global expansion of the realm of submission. We really need to ground this in the historical precedent to understand the ideological mandate the modern fighter believes he's operating under.
So let's revisit that historical context the source lays out. It references the 7th and 8th centuries, when Muslim armies reached new frontiers. What was the process?
Well, the sources remind us that the offer presented to non-Muslim societies upon conquest was famously unambiguous. There were 3 choices.
And they were existential choices, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They formed the foundation of this expansionist political philosophy. The first choice was simple: accept Islam and become a believer.
Okay. And if you didn't?
The second choice was to pay jizya, a kind of protective tax, and live as a subjugated dhimmi.
Which meant you were essentially a second-class citizen under Islamic rule.
Precisely. You were tolerated, but you were not equal.
Yeah.
And the third choice, for those who refused either conversion or subjugation,
Was death.
yes.
The source makes another critical point here, that the objective was never just about territorial conquest for its own sake, which is what defines most conventional military campaigns throughout history.
That's the strategic difference, and it's a huge one. Conventional conquest usually stops when resources are exhausted or borders are secured.
But this mission doesn't stop.
It doesn't. Territories were only incorporated into the system after they had been brought under the legal authority of Allah's law. The sources really stress there was no concept within this classical political military framework of live and let live with permanently sovereign, non-Muslim political entities.
So if they existed,
They were just temporary anomalies. They were waiting for eventual correction.
this centuries-old context then sets the stage for the modern fighter. So how does the modern jihadist, say a recruiter in Kashmir or a financier in London, how do they view their place in this massive, stalled historical trajectory?
He sees himself as the necessary vanguard. The modern jihadist believes the Ummah, the global Muslim community, stalled out after the colonial era.
Stalled out how?
They believe that their governments became weak, their scholars compromised, and their populations just got too comfortable with the secular, Western-imposed system of nation-states.
I see. So the mission was abandoned, in their view.
Exactly. The green flag, as the source dramatically puts it, was supposed to fly over every capital, but it hasn't. History went off track.
So the modern terrorist fighter sees himself as the one willing to perform the dirty work that the comfortable governments and the moderate scholars refuse to do.
Precisely. That's what the source calls the vanguard role. The terrorist is the one who is willing to restart this stalled engine of conquest and ideological expansion. They act as the cutting edge, the pioneer.
When the establishment is too comfortable with coexistence and nation-state boundaries.
Yes. And their violence is justified, at least internally, as the necessary action to restore the trajectory of history and fulfill the divine mandate that has been, in their view, temporarily neglected.
And this fundamental conceptual framework, this is the key to why all the conventional rules of engagement just fail.
It's the absolute key. Everything else flows from this.
Okay, so this philosophical framework leads immediately into a devastating operational consequence: the irrelevance of survival. This feels like a crucial distinction, one that separates this enemy from, well, virtually every conventional state or non-state actor we've dealt with since the Second World War.
It is.
So if the enemy prioritizes martyrdom, how do you deter them?
This is where the standard calculations of conflict completely shift. They just become meaningless. The source highlights the collapse of conventional deterrence when death is actively ranked above survival in the enemy's utility function.
Explain what you mean by utility function.
Well, for nation-states, deterrence relies on a simple assumption that leaders and citizens value their lives, their infrastructure, their long-term survival. So if you threaten a nuclear attack or a massive conventional retaliation, you threaten their very existence.
And the rational adversary pulls back.
The rational adversary pulls back. But what if, doctrinally, death isn't just a risk you take? What if it's an achievement, a guaranteed gateway to paradise?
Then the threat of death becomes an incentive, not a deterrent.
That's the doctrinal mechanism at play. The concept of martyrdom provides an infinitely preferable outcome to any life lived in this world. The source captures this perfectly with an analogy contrasting the figures who drive modern Western capitalism with the commitment of the terrorist.
Right, let's elaborate on that analogy. It's a powerful one.
So think about a figure like Sam Altman or any CEO, any politician. They want their organization or their state to win, to thrive, to survive. They are risk takers, of course, but they are absolutely not willing to die for a business outcome. It's not in the calculation.
Of course not.
But the calculation for the prey terrorist is inverted. They are not just willing to die. They actively prioritize death because it guarantees a state of eternal, blissful victory that this life can never offer.
The source provides that potent quote from Hezbollah's former Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, which reinforces this point perfectly.
It does. We love death as you love life. And the source is very clear that this isn't presented as empty tactical bravado. It is a foundational doctrinal statement with profound operational consequences.
Which means?
It means that attempts to deter them by threatening the loss of life or property, the standard tools of Western foreign policy, are useless. They don't work. The only deterrent that can possibly work has to be structural.
Structural how?
It has to be something that raises the operational cost of participation to such an extreme level that the organization itself, Hezbollah, ISIS, Jaish-e-Mohammed, simply cannot function. The goal has to be forcing the organization to cease to exist rather than just threatening the individual fighter's life.
So you can't deter the person, you have to destroy the platform.
You have to destroy the platform, exactly.
Now let's move into the operational reality of this. The idea of terrorism at retail scale. This is another phrase from the source that's chillingly strategic.
It is.
The source dismisses the common Western narrative that these smaller attacks, the lone stabber in London, the truck attacker in Nice, the sporadic gunfire in crowded markets, are just isolated incidents.
Or that they can be explained away as mental health crises.
All right. The source argues they are part of a deliberate strategy.
The source is extremely critical of using sociological excuses for what it frames as ideological warfare. It argues that these individuals are not disconnected. They are executing the same universal expansionist script, just at a localized or retail level.
So how are these attacks framed doctrinally? What's the message?
They're framed as the direct consequence of refusing the invitation for Islam to dominate. When a state refuses to accept that universal jurisdiction mandate we talked about, the pioneer applies pressure at the lowest possible level, right on the street.
And the tactical goal of that pressure is to utilize fear as a force multiplier.
Fear is the economic engine of retail-scale terrorism. The source argues this is the modern equivalent of historical raiding parties,
Which were designed to destabilize and demoralize a society before a full-on conquest.
precisely to exhaust them. If one small visible act of violence, a knife attack or a small bomb empties a neighborhood of non-adherents, then 10,000 such acts can functionally empty a city. That can lead to demographic and political collapse. Fear replaces jizya.
Okay, that links directly back to the concept of jizya, the historical tax on non-Muslim subjects. Let's break that down. How does fear function as the modern replacement for this tax?
Well, historically, jizya was the physical manifestation of submission. It was a tax you paid for protection and for the continuation of your life under Islamic rule.
A very clear transaction.
Very clear. When modern nation-states refuse to formally enforce this submission, terror steps in to fill that role. The source argues that fear becomes the informal psychological tax imposed on the civilian population for refusing that submission.
So it's a kind of continuous low-grade warfare.
That's a good way to put it. It's designed to make everyday life unsafe, to make you feel like a stranger in your own country, forcing non-adherents to either leave or, over time, internalize a state of subjugation.
We often hear about decentralized terror, which I think for many people sounds synonymous with disorganized. But the sources really emphasize that the effective operations are almost always centrally organized, funded, and indoctrinated.
This is a critical distinction for any counterterrorism strategy. The analysis shows that terrorism, even when it appears decentralized, like the so-called lone wolf, who is receiving instructions via encrypted channels, is almost always organized.
So the lone wolf isn't really alone.
Rarely. They are funded, indoctrinated, and crucially, often protected by sympathetic state actors or cowardly regimes who simply fail to act. If you only target the lone wolf symptom, you completely ignore the entire infrastructure that allows him to operate in the first place.
So the counter-response must therefore target the structure.
It has to. You have to target the financing, the training, and the ideological command and control. Otherwise, you're just playing whack-a-mole.
And this emphasis on organization is what allows them to achieve scale through precision rather than through mass armies.
Exactly. Why commit millions of soldiers when you can achieve the same policy-altering effect with a handful of committed, well-trained operatives? The source details this chilling effectiveness by citing specific examples of how small, dedicated groups can paralyze major nations.
Like 9/11.
Take the 9/11 attacks. 19 men. 19. And they fundamentally reshaped global security architecture and necessitated trillions of dollars in response.
Or the Mumbai 26/11 attacks in 2008.
Only 10 men. But they led to a prolonged, multi-day urban battle and permanently altered India's counter-terrorism posture. And then you have the Paris Bataclan assault, which involved fewer than a dozen coordinated actors.
The power then lies in that multiplier effect.
Yeah.
The precision and coordination of a few actors generating a massive political and psychological response in millions of people.
The ability to use minimal resources for maximal political effect is the ultimate expression of that pioneer ethos we started with. They innovate violence to achieve scale.
And this realization, this specific understanding of the threat, is what drives the uncompromising proactive response model that was eventually adopted by India and Israel.
It's the only logical response, according to these sources, to the specific nature of the threat.
Okay, so moving from this uncompromising diagnosis to prescriptive action, the source is absolutely clear that the first step has to be intellectual honesty.
Yeah.
We have to stop using euphemisms when we define the enemy and the root cause.
The disease has to be diagnosed without minimizing its roots. The source insists that we must acknowledge that this is an ideology that explicitly claims universal jurisdiction and authorizes permanent war against those who reject it.
And the analysis explicitly rejects the common sort of softer responses we often see in the West.
It does. It rejects attributing the cause to external socioeconomic factors like poverty. It rejects blaming foreign policy failures, or worse, attributing it to Islamophobia. The source frames these as dangerous distractions.
So if the ideology itself is the engine, then the solution cannot be negotiation or appeasement. The source's conclusion is that the only way to stop the pioneer is to, what? To eliminate the enabling infrastructure entirely.
That is the uncompromising conclusion. These groups will not start because we choose to ignore them or negotiate with them or attempt to placate them. They will stop only when the organizations that train, arm, finance, and inspire them cease to exist entirely.
And there's another part to that.
Yes. Furthermore, the operational cost of joining these organizations, the risk of being killed, captured, or financially ruined before you can even carry out a single attack, that cost must be raised to an unacceptably high level for the individual recruit.
This necessitates a radical conclusion, but a logically consistent one, about the constraints of international law and borders. The source calls it the refusal of sovereignty.
This is a direct challenge to the Westphalian system, the system of nation-states that has governed most international relations for centuries.
The core argument is simple, isn't it?
It's very simple. Since terrorism does not recognize borders or the sovereignty of foreign states when planning its operations.
Right. If a major attack on New Delhi can be planned, funded, and trained for entirely within Pakistani territory,
or if a rocket barrage on Tel Aviv can be commanded from Iranian-controlled territory in Lebanon,
then the counterterrorism response cannot afford to be shackled by those same boundaries.
Exactly. Sovereignty cannot be allowed to provide sanctuary to existential threats. That's the bottom line.
Okay, so let's unpack the specific mandatory actions that the sources mandate to fight an enemy that refuses to be deterred and refuses to be contained.
The mandate is one of unrelenting extraterritorial action. First, safe havens must be made unsafe. This means striking training camps and operational headquarters regardless of where they are situated.
So no place is off limits.
No place. Training camps must be destroyed wherever they exist, and this must be a non-negotiable imperative. Financiers must disappear, their wealth must be confiscated, their ability to move money crippled.
And what about the ideologues, the ones who inspire the violence?
They must be silenced. The doctrine explicitly rejects the idea that a neighboring state's sovereignty can provide some kind of automatic, permanent sanctuary for hostile non-state actors operating against you.
The ultimate goal, then, is not the politically palatable term degradation or containment, but something far stronger.
It's extinction.
The extinction mandate.
It is an extinction mandate. The pursuit is not merely to degrade capabilities, but to pursue specific organizations until they are rendered functionally extinct.
And the source lists the key targets clearly.
It does. Jaish-e-Mohammed, or Jem Lashkar-e-Taiba, Lati Hezbollah, Hamas, and key ISIS provincial cells. For a nation to feel safe, these groups must be eliminated as functioning entities.
And the sources point specifically to India and Israel as the two democracies that have internalized this uncompromising reality better than most Western powers.
Well, having been on the receiving end of thousands of attacks, often operating directly from hostile neighboring territory for decades, these two nations have learned the painful lesson that soft power and diplomatic appeals are insufficient.
They've seen it firsthand.
They've seen terrorists operate with complete impunity from Pakistani soil or from Iranian-controlled proxy zones in Lebanon and Syria. Their conclusion, as laid out here, is that appealing to international law or passing UN resolutions is often just theater.
Why theater?
Because the enemy weaponizes those same laws. They use sovereignty as a shield while completely ignoring it operationally. It's a one-way street.
So instead of diplomatic theater, they rely on a quiet, relentless, and often extraterritorial operational doctrine.
Exactly. This is what defines their emerging strategic partnership.
This transition to proactive, targeted action.
Yes. The blueprint they developed relies on things like targeted killings, sabotage of supply lines deep inside hostile territory, focused cyber intrusions designed to disrupt command and control, and, of course, special forces raids.
And the conclusion is that these actions, carried out quietly and precisely,
have proven far more effective in disrupting the operational capability of these groups than sanctions or strongly worded diplomatic statements ever could.
Okay, so we transition now to the practical application of this doctrine, the security compact between India and Israel. They're separated by thousands of miles of geography, but they are profoundly united by this shared threat perception.
And the resulting uncompromising strategic clarity. The core insight of the second set of sources we have is that both New Delhi and Jerusalem recognized very early on that facing this tempest of ideological, asymmetrical warfare required a response that was not just morally outraged.
Yeah, which is easy to be.
Which is easy, but ultimately ineffective. It required a response that was methodical, relentless, and precision-engineered. They understood that dealing with a pioneer requires partners who share that non-conditional clarity.
And this isn't just a military relationship, is it? The cooperation spans intelligence sharing, defense technology, advanced training.
It's everything. Cyber defense, profound diplomatic coordination. It's an entire counterterrorism architecture that's been built deliberately, piece by piece, over decades.
So it's one of the most robust yet often understated security alliances in the world.
I think that's a fair assessment. And interestingly, the relationship began discreetly. The source says it was born in the shadows, long before formal diplomatic recognition in 1992.
So back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes. It was rooted in shared existential vulnerabilities. Think about it. Both had hostile neighbors actively funding proxy warfare. Both were dealing with ideological radicalization emanating from certain regions, and both critically understood that state-sponsored terrorism was being used as a policy tool against them.
So they needed a lifeline, one that wasn't beholden to the politics of the Cold War.
Exactly. And the watershed moment for formalizing and accelerating this relationship was the establishment of full diplomatic relations in 1992. That opened the floodgates for strategic collaboration.
And we can trace the hardening of this alliance through two major operational crises cited in the sources, crises that really cemented the absolute necessity of operational trust. The first was the Kargil War in 1999.
A critical moment.
So when Pakistani infiltrators, backed by artillery, were dug in along the Himalayan ridgelines, Israel supplied immediate, urgent assistance. This wasn't a standard arms deal. It was operational support under fire.
It was absolutely crucial. They provided critically needed artillery shells, which were scarce for India at the time. More importantly, they supplied advanced unmanned aerial surveillance systems, UAVs, which gave India an unprecedented view of those entrenched positions.
Eyes in the sky when they needed them most.
And high-resolution precision imagery intelligence. This assistance was delivered rapidly and discreetly under extreme pressure, and it established a profound precedent for operational trust that transcended normal political ties.
So Israel proved itself a reliable partner when India was at its most vulnerable.
It did. The second and more tragic milestone was the Mumbai attacks of 26/11 in 2008, where the brutality of the Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists created a tragic but deep personal insecurity link.
Absolutely. When 10 lectured terrorists turned Mumbai into a prolonged, coordinated urban battleground, Israeli specialists immediately assisted.
Yes, they were instrumental in forensic reconstruction, complex urban combat analysis, and assisting with critical hostage rescue protocols.
Especially surrounding the siege of the Chabad house.
especially then. That shared experience, fighting an identical ideological foe in a dense urban environment, created an unparalleled bond between the nation's respective security establishments.
And this collaboration quickly moved beyond just ad hoc assistance during crises. It became deeply institutionalized.
That institutionalization is the key to its durability. The establishment of the Joint Working Group on Counterterrorism, the JWG, in the year 2000 formalized this shared commitment.
And the sources highlight the frequency of their meetings.
Yes, as of 2023, they have held 16 rounds of annual meetings. This frequency is not typical. It demonstrates an institutionalized, deep coordination on everything from combating state-sponsored proxy terrorism to addressing highly complex emerging threats in asymmetric warfare.
So the JWG effectively transformed the partnership.
It transformed it from occasional exchanges into a strategic artery running right through both national security systems.
All right, now let's get into the nuts and bolts, the 4 core pillars of this cooperation that translate that extinction mandate into actionable operations. Pillar 1 is intelligence sharing. Right. If terrorism is a networked entity that operates across borders, then intelligence is the necessary real-time antidote.
And the synergy here is formidable because they really complement each other's gaps. Israel brings vast, decades-long expertise fighting highly sophisticated, state-backed proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah.
And deep insight into Iranian operational doctrine.
Deep insight. India, on the other hand, contributes battlefield-hardened, real-time, large-scale insights from the incredibly challenging South Asia theater, specifically the Pakistan-Afghanistan arc, and the complex internal dynamics of the Kashmir insurgency.
What specific granular data is flowing between these nations to make a difference? It has to be more than just high-level strategic summaries, right?
Oh, it's highly granular. It involves technical, financial, and movement data. First, they exchange detailed movement and operational patterns of specific high-value terrorist operatives across West Asia, South Asia, and increasingly Africa.
So they're tracking individuals across continents.
They are. Second, and this is critical, they collaborate heavily on financial intelligence monitoring and tracing financial flows linked to extremist outfits.
And paying particular attention to crypto financing.
Exactly, and the complex Hawala networks they use to evade sanctions. Third, they share granular insights on radicalization networks spanning South Asia, West Asia, and Africa. And finally, they track the proliferation and exploitation of dual-use technologies.
What are dual-use technologies?
These are items that can be purchased legally but can be exploited by militant groups for warfare. Think advanced commercial drones, high-end encryption software, things like that.
And this synergy is directly credited in the sources with saving lives and disrupting operations.
Absolutely. The ability to cross-reference this data allows them to prevent attacks, disrupt sophisticated cells, and expose cross-border plots before they can mature. When an operative trained in Pakistan travels to Gaza, or an operative trained in Lebanon attempts to enter Europe via South Asia,
these intelligence streams connect the dots.
They connect the dots. It reinforces the doctrine that there are no isolated theaters of conflict in the war against the pioneer.
Okay, moving to Pillar 2, defense technology and arms transfers. The sources note that Israel ranks among India's top 3 arms suppliers, with over $10 billion in defense trade since the 2000s. But you emphasize that this trade is surgical. How does that surgical focus manifest in the technology they acquire?
It's surgical because the acquisitions are tailored specifically for the granular realities of their shared security challenges. They are not acquiring general-purpose conventional warfare tools. They are acquiring equipment designed for counterinsurgency, counter-infiltration, night raids, mountain warfare, and precision strikes in dense urban areas.
The goal is technological supremacy in asymmetric warfare.
That's it.
Let's elaborate on the specific high-tech equipment cited in the sources. I want to understand why each piece is so vital to this proactive doctrine.
The list is very instructive. First, you have the Heron and Searcher unmanned aerial vehicles, the UAVs. These are absolutely essential. They provide persistent, real-time surveillance, which is critical for monitoring the line of control, the LASI, with Pakistan.
And for securing other sensitive borders against infiltration.
Yes. These are the eyes in the sky that enable targeted strikes based on that extinction mandate.
Okay, what's next on the list?
Second, the Falcon AW-WEF-ES, the Airborne Warning and Control System. This is one of the world's most advanced airborne radars. India acquired several of these units.
Why is that so critical? What problem does it solve?
It addresses strategic vulnerabilities, it helps track sophisticated cross-border infiltration patterns, and monitors hostile air traffic approaching disputed territories. It gives India command of the airspace needed to protect itself from any state-level support for terrorism.
So it's a defensive shield, but a very advanced one. And
Third, the Barak 8 air defense systems. This is a surface-to-air missile system, and it was famously co-developed between the two nations. This isn't just a defense system, it's a strategic necessity for India's complex border environments, particularly against cruise missiles and high-speed threats.
And the co-development aspect is important.
It's huge. It demonstrates a commitment to long-term trust and strategic integration. It's not just a sale.
And beyond these major platforms, are there smaller, more tactical systems involved?
Yes. Highly effective weapons for specific asymmetric situations, like the Spike anti-tank guided missiles, or ATGMs. These are essential for combating militant fortifications or proxy forces that might be using armored vehicles.
And what about night operations? That's always a key vulnerability.
Perhaps the most critical piece. Cutting-edge night vision technology, advanced thermal sensors, and high-resolution detection equipment. This tech guarantees operational superiority during the hours of darkness, which is when many of these infiltration attempts actually occur.
So what is the single biggest advantage Israel offers India compared to, say, major arms suppliers in Europe or the US? There must be a reason this relationship is so strong.
It is the non-conditional nature of the transfer. This is a significant factor in cementing trust. Israel offers technology without political sermonizing.
What does that mean in practice?
It means that unlike some Western partners who often impose restrictive human rights clauses or sanction threats or intrusive end-use interrogations that are often designed for public consumption back home,
Israel doesn't do that.
Israel offers the technology and often includes co-production aligned with India's Make in India initiative without these political conditionalities. This ensures rapid capability acquisition and technology transfer that isn't shackled by external political agendas.
Okay, Pillar 3. This focuses on the operational knowledge transfer, training, and joint exercises. The courses provide impressive detail on which specific elite forces are training together, which speaks volumes about the depth of trust here.
It really does. This training is designed to transmit the Israeli doctrine, which is all about speed, surprise, surgical lethality, and a non-negotiable bias for proactive action, directly into India's operational bloodstream.
So on the Indian side, which units are involved?
The units involved are the best of the best. You have the National Security Guard, the NSG, which is the primary counterterrorism unit, the Marine Commandos, or Marcos, who specialize in maritime and amphibious operations, the Garuds, the Indian Air Force Special Unit, and the Para-Special Forces, the Para-SF, known for airborne and special reconnaissance.
And they are training alongside which legendary Israeli forces?
They're training with Israel's most elite counterterrorism and special operations units. That means Yamam, which handles complex hostage rescue. Shayat 13, the Naval Special Operations Unit, crucial for securing vast coastlines and addressing threats from the sea, and Sayeret Maktal, which is known for deep reconnaissance and high-value targeting.
Let's elaborate on the specific skill sets being developed here. Why is training between, say, the NSG and Yamam or Marcos and Shayat 13 so critical for their shared proactive doctrine?
The training focuses intensively on the granular reality of the asymmetric threats that both nations face daily. For the NSG and Yamam, the focus is on hostage rescue in dense urban terrains. That requires split-second decision-making and minimal collateral damage, a capability that was honed after events like 26/11.
And for the naval commandos?
For Marcos and Shayat 13, the focus is on maritime counterterrorism, securing oil installations, neutralization of attacks coming from the sea. These are constant vulnerabilities for peninsular India and for Israel's gas platforms in the Mediterranean.
What other scenarios do they train for?
They also train extensively on aircraft and bus hijacking neutralization, the incredibly complex environment of tunnel warfare, which Israel specializes in, precision sniping, and close quarters battle, or CQB. This is all about constant joint doctrine refinement for speed and lethality.
Finally, Pillar 4, cybersecurity and homeland security. Since the Pioneer uses encrypted channels, crypto, and now AI for mass radicalization, the digital front is crucial.
It's the invisible front line. This is where the future of the war against the Pioneer will be fought. Collaboration here is absolutely essential because the threat environment changes at the speed of code.
And terrorist groups are adapting quickly.
They're using dark web forums, sophisticated encryption, and now even AI to generate propaganda and deepfakes designed to sow confusion and incite violence.
So what are the key areas of technological focus in this digital collaboration?
First, cyber intrusion detection and critical infrastructure protection. Both nations are highly developed and thus highly vulnerable targets. Second, they focus heavily on dark web monitoring and counter-propaganda, actively identifying and preempting online radicalization efforts and recruitment drives.
But what about the money?
That's the third area. There is intense focus on fintech-based terror finance tracing. This is crucial for crippling the logistical backbone of these organizations that rely on increasingly sophisticated, decentralized financial methods.
And the fourth area you mentioned, deepfakes.
Yes, they are jointly developing and deploying deepfake countermeasures because the use of synthetic media to generate geopolitical instability is an imminent threat. It's not science fiction anymore.
And the integration here seems extremely deep. It involves private firms as well as government agencies.
It's a shared security ecosystem. Major Israeli cyber firms, like Check Point and others, along with research clusters from Beersheba to Tel Aviv, are deeply integrated with Indian government agencies, think tanks, and its private sector ecosystems.
So they're building a framework for proactive defense.
Exactly. Not just reacting to breaches, they are essentially creating a joint firewall that is calibrated to handle threats that can originate anywhere in the world and target the critical functions of their respective societies.
So this alliance, which was already robust, seems to have been accelerated and solidified even further by recent high-level diplomatic and operational meetings described in the sources. The date, November 4, 2025, seems to be a defining moment.
It was. That date marked a crucial maturation point, formalizing the alliance's shift into what the sources are calling high orbit.
What happened on that day?
India's External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, met with the Israeli Foreign Minister, Gideon Sa'ar, in New Delhi. This was strategically timed and resulted in several key high-level agreements, most notably a joint public commitment to zero tolerance for terrorism.
Which is a clear diplomatic signal to the world and to hostile state sponsors.
A very clear signal. And in terms of hardening the cooperation mechanisms, they took specific institutional steps.
Such as?
They signed a Memorandum of Understanding, an MU, on long-term security technology cooperation, ensuring sustained resource allocation over the next decade. They also agreed to formally expand and institutionalize the existing intelligence sharing protocols, making real-time data exchange standard procedure, not an exception.
And what about co-production?
Critically, they opened new, fast-tracked avenues for co-production under India's Atmanirbhar Bharat, or Self-Reliant India initiative. This signals Israel's commitment to helping India build its own indigenous defense capacity, not just selling hardware off the shelf.
This political agreement happened in parallel with high-level defense meetings, right?
Yes. The 17th Joint Working Group on Defense Cooperation convened at the same time. This group focused intensely on expanding collaboration on counterinsurgency tactics, advanced drone warfare doctrine.
Moving beyond just UAVs to drone interception and deployment.
Right. And addressing new emerging threats like swarm attacks and cyber-enabled terrorism. The sheer volume of these simultaneous high-level meetings confirms they are recalibrating the entire partnership to face a new, more technologically advanced, asymmetric threat landscape.
And all this deepening cooperation occurred against a backdrop of extreme regional volatility.
Precisely. This maturation happened during the intense backdrop of the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, the persistent Hezbollah rocket escalations in the north, the expansion of Iranian proxy forces across the region.
Relentless, high-pressure, Pakistan-based infiltration attempts in Kashmir.
All at the same time. The sources explicitly state that the intelligence cooperation between the two nations quietly reached an unprecedented depth during these conflicts, as both were engaged in real-time, high-stakes security operations against very similar foes.
So shared necessity accelerated trust.
It always does.
Why does this particular partnership succeed and demonstrate such rare durability, where other multinational security alliances might falter due to geopolitical or economic friction?
Right.
The sources must have a take on this.
They do. They identify 5 core characteristics that provide this alliance with its stability, and they all center on that initial shared, uncompromising worldview we discussed at the very beginning.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is strategic honesty.
And this goes back to the idea that they don't moralize each other's actions.
Correct. Neither country judges or moralizes the other's specific operational choices or doctrines. Terrorism is treated purely as a shared military and intelligence problem that requires uncompromising action, not as a sociological or political debate that requires external approval or appeasement.
Okay. The second factor is the highly valued lack of political conditionalities.
This is a major trust builder, and it directly contrasts them with Western partners. Israel doesn't attach the intrusive human rights clauses, the sanctions threats, or the public end-use interrogations that often accompany defense deals from Europe or the U.S.
And that non-conditional nature builds immense trust.
It does, and it ensures rapid capability acquisition, which is essential when the threat you face is immediate and existential.
Third, they share fundamentally similar threat environments. This means they don't need to spend time explaining their daily reality to one another.
That's a huge part of it. Both nations face near-identical operational challenges. Cross-border terrorism involving non-state actors with state backing, the pressure of proxy militias funded by adversarial states like Pakistan and Iran, radical transnational ideologies, and continuous information warfare aimed at destabilization.
That shared daily reality removes the need for lengthy explanation or justification for hardline tactics.
It does. They get it. Fourth is the willingness to share technology without hesitation.
This moves the relationship beyond just a buyer and a seller.
It does. Israel doesn't just transfer cutting-edge hardware, it transfers the comprehensive know-how, the operational doctrine, the maintenance protocols. This enables India to not only operate the equipment, but to build, maintain, and eventually upgrade complex systems independently, which aligns perfectly with Make in India.
And that level of technology transfer is rare.
It's extremely rare and demonstrates a degree of mutual trust reserved only for the most vital partners.
And finally, the fifth factor, the shared proactive doctrine. This is the philosophical core that unites them.
It is the defining philosophical backbone. It ties right back to the extinction mandate. Both nations operate under the shared belief that, and this is a quote, terrorism does not respect borders. Counter-terrorism cannot be shackled by them.
And this philosophical alignment validates and legitimizes their actions, at least to each other.
It validates targeted, extraterritorial action and the relentless pursuit of groups until extinction. It means their operational parameters are dictated by necessity, not by diplomatic convenience.
The sources conclude that the threat landscape is changing rapidly. The enemy is innovating, moving from the lone wolf stabbings we discussed earlier to highly sophisticated threats like drone swarms and AI-generated mass radicalization. So how is this partnership preparing for the next era of asymmetric warfare?
The future of this cooperation is focused entirely on building what the sources call a shared security ecosystem that's calibrated for speed and for digital threats. The emphasis is moving beyond mere technological collaboration into genuine co-creation of doctrine and technology.
Co-creation, so they're building it together.
Exactly. The future areas of expansion, according to the sources, are hyper-specialized and cutting-edge.
Okay, let's delve into those highly specialized areas, starting with AI-driven threat forecasting. What does that look like?
This is crucial. They are focusing heavily on AI-driven threat forecasting. This means using massive data sets from both of their theaters of operation to predict where the next major attack vector will emerge.
Based on what kinds of data?
Based on financing patterns, radicalization chatter online, and movement data of known operatives. This also includes developing autonomous surveillance architectures that require minimal human intervention, ensuring constant vigilance along thousands of miles of disputed borders.
And what about protecting their own secrets in this new digital age?
Security is paramount. They are jointly working on quantum communication security to protect their classified data sharing from future decryption capabilities that we know are coming.
So they're trying to future-proof their communications.
They have to. They're also investing heavily in robust drone countermeasures, particularly focused on neutralizing swarm attacks.
Where dozens or hundreds of cheap, weaponized commercial drones might be deployed all at once.
It's a nightmare scenario they're actively preparing for.
The ultimate goal sounds like it's an integration of biometric and operational intelligence.
Exactly. This all culminates in biometric intelligence fusion. That's the ability to identify, track, and disrupt operatives through advanced facial recognition, gait analysis, and forensic data, and integrating this seamlessly across both of their intelligence systems.
And all of this feeds into what?
All of this feeds into a sophisticated joint special operations doctrine that is designed to handle threats that emerge at the speed of code and operate within dense urban environments.
This means the partnership is moving into a realm where they are jointly defining the future of counter-terror strategy. They're creating an ecosystem of defense rather than merely reacting to attacks planned by others.
Absolutely. They are building an architecture designed to be inherently resilient in a world where small groups can use advanced technology to paralyze entire nations and where propaganda can spread faster than bullets.
They recognized that the ideological nature of the threat means the war is permanent.
And therefore, the defense must be relentlessly dynamic and technologically superior.
The final assessment provided by the sources leaves us with a sense of inevitability about the threat's persistence, but it also delivers a clearly defined, proven blueprint for an effective, proactive defense.
The ultimate message is one of stark, necessary realism. It acknowledges the challenges of this long war against an uncompromising ideological enemy, but it's paired with a successful strategic response model.
And the sources have a quote to sum that up.
Yes, from India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who summarized it in November 2025 by saying this unique partnership is defined by trust and reliability.
It's a critical conclusion. In this particular unrelenting war against an expansionist ideological enemy, clarity of purpose and the operational ability to act without political reservation are paramount. The sources assert that few alliances truly matter more than this specific compact built on shared existential need.
So we've navigated two highly complex and interlocking arguments today. First, the ideological mandate for universal expansion that compels the terrorist to view himself as an unstoppable pioneer.
Right.
And second, the strategic non-conditional alliance between India and Israel that's designed for an effective, relentless, and proactive counter-response.
We dove deep into the conceptual necessity of eliminating safe havens, the non-conditional transfer of critical technologies like the Barak 8 air defense system and the Falcon AWACS.
And that shared, actionable doctrine of targeted extraterritorial action.
A doctrine that explicitly rejects containment as a viable long-term strategy.
And I think the sources ultimately challenge us profoundly to see the threat with necessary clarity and relentlessness and to avoid the politically comfortable euphemisms that have often paralyzed response efforts across the globe.
So we began by understanding that the pioneer terrorist believes containment is impossible and that his goal is universal jurisdiction. The question you should consider, based on this uncompromising doctrine of perpetual extraterritorial war, is this. If the enemy's goal is to destroy the realm of war and achieve universal submission, how much of your own sovereignty are you willing to sacrifice?
And not to the enemy.
Not to the enemy, but to your most trusted allies in order to truly achieve safety. What is the maximum cost nations must be prepared to pay in terms of diplomatic conventions and national borders to achieve the complete extinction of groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Hezbollah?